Welcome to the Asbestos Knowledge Empire.
What does asbestos management mean to you?
I used to really struggle with the asbestos management at my site, but now it's a breeze.
It used to be really expensive. I was paying loads, but now I've got my asbestos power team in place. It's so much easier.
Asbestos can be a pain in the arse if not handled right.
We had to stop the job because asbestos was discovered. Now we don't have that problem.
Asbestos management is easier than you think. Asbestos management. Be proactive, not reactive. Think about asbestos first, not last.
And now your hosts, best-selling authors and asbestos experts, Ian Stone and Neil Munro.
Welcome to the Asbestos Knowledge Empire. I'm Ian Stone.
I'm Neil Munro.
So today we're talking about hazardous material surveys and what has that got to do with asbestos?
Yeah, basically what a hazardous material survey, as the name describes, it's basically looking at any type of hazard which could pose a risk to somebody's health and safety.
Yeah.
Although we talk a lot about asbestos, and asbestos form a great hazard within buildings or sites, there are lots of other sort of materials or items that can pose a significant risk to health as well, isn't there?
Definitely, and that's the thing. We do obviously talk about asbestos predominantly on this podcast, but it's just some projects that we've been involved with recently on the hazardous materials side. We just wanted to highlight because although we have a whinge up now and again of a lot of people don't get their asbestos surveys done, either done or early enough, it's the same with the hazardous materials surveys. And I mean, they're even kind of lesser known to an extent than asbestos surveys.
Yeah, 100%.
But they are equally as important. And the times that we do these surveys, generally speaking, it's when it's a redevelopment of a site or part of a site's being knocked down or rebuilt, those kind of things. And to give you an example of some of the places we've done hazardous material surveys are disused mental hospitals, disused normal hospitals, garages, commercial buildings, offices, things like that. And a lot of the time they've been left to go to a bit of rack and ruin for the last, I don't know, however many years. I mean, it always makes me surprised how quickly a building without being occupied can kind of fall apart.
Yeah, it's when lack of maintenance and stuff on buildings, they soon start to deteriorate, and the kind of weather come in, let wildlife come in.
Yeah, nature takes over in a massive way.
You get break-ins, you get people sleeping rough in these areas, drug taking. These all kind of create significant risks to health for anyone coming in to then redevelop or reoccupy those areas. And that can cause some significant health risks as well.
Definitely. I mean, on some sites as well, when they've come to the end of life and they're not used anymore, like I'm thinking of hospitals here, like they're supposed to have a full decommissioning carried out and a decommissioning report done, basically saying, yep, everything that was a little bit naughty, a bit dangerous here has been removed and it's all gone.
Yeah.
But the amount of sites that I've been to where we do a hazmat survey and you do identify, I mean, I remember there was one site we found liquid mercury in vials and stuff like that was just kind of milling about because it had been left. And it's those kind of things as well. So, I mean, even more importantly, on kind of redevelopment sites of things where you know there have been dangers on site, like I say, hospitals where they use different chemicals and drugs and things like that, and equally on big commercial sites where they use all sorts of different chemicals and equipment and things like that, there's definitely that kind of higher risk of finding something hazardous than an office block, for instance.
Yeah.
But like Neil said, there's other things at play here, which is nature coming back in, animals coming in, people coming into the building and creating things that shouldn't be there.
Yeah. So kind of similar to the asbestos surveys, probably the most important initial assessment is to carry out a desktop study, isn't it? So again, it's gathering, as Ian just said, it's gathering that initial history information about the site and its uses and the type of works, the type of people that were on site, etc. So you can then gather additional potential risks that may be present. As Ian described, it's the uses were for that building and what the potential hazards that may be left as a remnant from its earlier uses. Gathering that information, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, again, think about hospitals. They're usually X-ray departments. They've got equipment in, using isotopes and whatever they use.
Yeah, and the ventilation systems, as you said, that's really important because, as you can appreciate, extracting biological hazards, as they do in hospitals, if that's left, and it's been left for a period of time, who knows what you're going to be going into once you start opening those elements up. So ducting and extraction systems, etc.
Definitely. Yeah, we did a survey once on, it wasn't a hospital, it was a lab. And that's exactly what we came across. There was a lab, they did experiments and all sorts of things. And yeah, the ducting was still contaminated because it hadn't been cleaned properly. That was something that we needed to know as surveyors before we went into the building so that we were safe, so that we could take the precautions before just kind of cracking on and getting in there and getting contaminated ourselves.
Yeah, because that information will help, the surveyors build up that risk assessment, as Ian said, of what precautions do we need to take to obviously open these places up and inspect them for any additional hazards.
I'm just thinking there's some other sites as well. Like I remember an RAF base that I've been to, and there was really old mechanical equipment there, and all over that there was like little radioactive stickers and stuff. So it was like, you need to know this information before we go, because
and that just reminded me of the shooting ranges that we've done.
Yes.
There's a hazard for lead from the shot, that using the gun ranges, shooting the bullets. They always embed into various locations, and that can have a serious hazard to health.
It can. I mean, the extraction on a proper gun shooting range, when people are shooting bullets, it creates a lot of dust in the air. You've got obviously the explosion from the bullet going off, the ricochet and the embedding of the bullet in the backstop. Yeah. But that creates dust fragments, and those dust fragments are all extracted out of it by big ventilation. And that's the problem with that, is when you break that open, you have got just asbestos, lead dust everywhere.
Yeah.
So that can be an issue. So we're going to run through just a few of the things that can be included. Not all hazardous material surveys are the same. Like we're saying, it comes down to that risk assessment and what the site was based on and what the client's looking for. So this is something where you need to have that conversation with your consultant to make sure that you're getting what you need. Yeah,
it's definitely not as rigidly defined as asbestos.
No, it's not.
Because essentially with the asbestos, we're kind of only, focusing on one element, whereas this is a focus on various different things. And again, as Ian said, it depends on the steer of the client, because when we're talking about multiple hazards that we're identifying, and that could involve multiple sampling regimes for each element. And again, it really does depend on the budget that's in place for this, because when we're talking about multiple different items, sampling, the cost for testing all those items can be quite significant.
Definitely.
So it does have to be a conversation on, and really this is where the desktop study really kicks in, is that initial, what are the risks from the potential hazards of these buildings, and what do we actually really need to identify positively, or are we just happy for a visual inspection of those items as well?
Definitely. Because
it might be a case that, do we need to just identify it once and then catalogue those additional items, or do we really need positive sampling on these surveys? Yeah, definitely. Some of the things that we look out for on the hazmat surveys, asbestos, that's an obvious one. That's we always do them as two surveys. It's always the asbestos as one, because like Neil said, we are bound by how we do it and what we're doing, what we're sampling, what we're looking for. So the client will always get a asbestos survey report, and then they will get a hazmat report in addition to that. So also in the hazardous materials report, we'd look for things like lead in paint. Yeah. That's been used in literally lots of different places, even in whitewashes on walls, not just on timber or plaster. It's literally just been used everywhere. Metal window frames, door frames, architraves, all sorts of places. So if those things are coming off, then they need to be highlighted. Another one on the list is anthrax in plaster. Yeah. And again, that could be where this desktop study kicks in. If it is an older building where lath and plaster has been used, you can get a good idea, an indication of kind of how many samples you'd need taken on that. If it's like an industrial warehouse, the likelihood of having horsehair plaster is very low.
Yeah.
So again, that's where you kind of need to look at the sampling regimes.
Another one would be anthrax in soils. So if you've got, I don't know, the most common places are abattoirs and farms.
Yeah, so if it's built on an old farm.
Yeah, anywhere where livestock may have been buried or where the ground might have become contaminated from large amounts of livestock. Those are the kind of places where you could look at anthrax in soil. Water testing, it's another thing that can contain a lot of hazards, such as Legionella, E. coli. We'd take samples for total viable count, for E. coli analysis, just to, again, before that water's disturbed or pumped out of a basement or something like that.
Yeah.
It needs to be checked to make sure that, no, it's okay, or if it's not okay, then what do we need to do to make it all right to pump out and clear that area?
Yeah, this is where, on the types of sites that we're talking about, ugly, horrible, not looked after sites, there's always stagnant water present. It's just the nature of these types of sites. And that may be in buildings, surrounding buildings, so it might be in water tanks, it may even just be residue in the pipes themselves.
Yeah. And
as Ian said, like basements flooded, even just stagnant in the actual areas in the rooms.
Yeah.
If you've had water penetration through the ceilings, etc., that can be held in various locations.
Another one on the list would be mould.
It kind of follows on from that, isn't it?
It does.
Where you've got dampness, where the buildings are not airtight or watertight, you do get mould, and various degrees of mould and different types.
Different types, exactly. And that's the thing. It's not all mould is the same.
No.
There's mould that's kind of, it's never going to kind of harm anyone or do anything, but then there's some moulds out that are really dangerous, and when they get airborne, that's when the respiratory diseases come into play, and that's where the hazard comes from. So again, we'd be looking at total viable count for those, and also identifying any other moulds in and around. And also, I suppose, the same for airborne micro-organisms.
Yeah.
That would be the same thing. It would be air sampling for micro-organisms. Again, see what the count is in the air, see what is grown back in the lab, just to identify those. Because again, if you've got airborne micro-organisms, again, that's creating that issue around respiratory diseases for anybody that's going to be going into those areas to work and to, I don't know, start taking the building apart.
Yeah.
Other things as well, which people don't always consider.
But they're probably one of the most common in redundant and derelict buildings.
Yeah, and it's called zoonosis, so which sounds all posh and...
Sounds fun.
Zoonosis, yeah?
Going to the zoo.
It's basically anything where humans can interact and get a disease from animals, animal carcasses, animal guano, mess, things like that. And I mean, foxes are generally rife in spreading and getting into buildings.
Yeah.
Badgers can be as well. Most commonly, though, I'd say it probably is foxes and pigeons.
Yeah.
And pigeons, when they take over a building, they take over it.
Disgusting.
It is. The pigeon guano in buildings that have been derelict for even a couple of years, if they've found a way in and they nest, there's literally mess all over the floor, and it just gets thicker and thicker and thicker, and it stinks. And generally there's always, there's pigeon carcasses in and around, same as the foxes. And obviously they're locations where us as humans can contract diseases from.
Yeah.
I mean, another one is the Viles disease.
Yeah.
From rats. Leptospirosis. Again, that can be in the water or in and around where you've got like a rat's nest, or rats are using a place to go between, things like that. And then other things that we kind of inspect for.
It's actually physical stuff in the buildings, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, the first one comes to mind is drug use.
Yeah, which is more common than you'd like to believe.
Oh, it's rife.
For some reason, if there's a building that's empty for a period of time, it's a beacon to people breaking in and using it as drug dens, basically.
Yeah, and it is. It's not just homeless people that go and do it. other members of society will actually seek out these areas, like you said, turn it into a bit of a drug den.
Yeah.
And the problem with that being is there's always needles everywhere. I'm talking scattered everywhere. So if they've taken over a room, I don't know why, but they always find a mattress somewhere.
Yeah.
There's a mattress in the corner. This is like guaranteed every time. There's a mattress in the corner, and you'll see food and beer wrappers everywhere. And then literally in and around
Needles.
that room and the surrounding rooms are needles and the ends are needles.
Yeah, and there's definitely no sort of needle safety policy that happens, is it? For some reason, it's just literally dumped.
Yeah.
No caps on needles.
Which, I mean, I find it bizarre. I mean, it's a whole different subject, right, about talking about drug use and things. But I don't know. If that was me in that location, I wouldn't leave and just throw a needle around because I know what I'm like.
Yeah.
I'm accident prone and I'd stab myself with it again. I know I would.
Yeah.
So I don't understand the mentality, but then I suppose that's the whole thing about drug use.
Yeah.
Of you're not perhaps always thinking compos mentis, but
no.
But yeah, no, that is a big one because the needles can be well hidden and they can be well hidden within piles of rubbish and things like that. So if you've got people going into a building doing a general building clearance, well, you then need to identify that before they go and start work because you need like the grabbers to pick the needles up. You need thick impervious gloves that they can't be penetrated and things like that. So that's why that's a big issue. And we do find that a lot. More often than so, it is kind of cities and towns, those places, something out in the country. But even so, it can't be discounted because, again, people do seek out these buildings because they can go and do what they want in them without being disturbed because they're derelict, they're empty, they're out of the way. So other stuff on site, oils, find them a lot. There's always canisters of things, barrels of things. And sometimes, I mean, I suppose that's like oils, containers, chemicals. We find them. Sometimes you can identify them by looking at the information on there. Sometimes you have to do a bit of research into what possibility they could be. But again, it's about cataloguing these things so that when we go into the property to actually start the works, people aren't disturbing anything untoward. It's identified before they go in.
Yeah, lots of the kind of industrial warehouses and factories, they probably would have had oil tanks that they were using for fuel at some point. And again, you've got the remnants of those tanks and pipe work and ancillary items that they use to do that. So it's not, even if they may be empty, there may still be residues within those locations as well.
Definitely. PCBs is another one. Polychlorinated biphenyls. They were used, they're man-made. Again, they could be in numerous locations. So that's something we'd look out for. And then I suppose the last thing that springs to my mind is batteries. There's always seems to be an abundance of batteries that are dumped in and around buildings. They've got nasty things in them, acid, plus whatever else they're made of. So, yeah, it's batteries. And some of the old security alarms and systems used to have big battery backups. In factories, you have like big swaths of charging points, forklift batteries.
Yeah.
And they're always dumped and just left. And yes, it's just something else to look out for.
Yeah. And then just any other general sort of hazards as well. You know, there may be knives, there may be redundant old equipment that's been left and stored and that may contain whatever.
Exactly that.
It's just a general review of basically looking for anything that could pose any risk to health.
And that is it. I mean, that's why there's not a definitive list because every single site is different. It is kind of just those things of what can we identify to highlight that might be a risk to anyone coming in here to work.
Yeah.
And that's it. And it's about cataloguing that information either by photographing and marking on plans or taking samples and taking photographs and marking on plans, just so you've got all of that information. And then that just helps the construction team move forward with what they're actually planning to do, how they're going to tackle it. And it depends on what you've got as well when you look at it. I mean, there's buildings that we've done where you've got a whole number of issues. However, the first thing is to kind of tackle the needles before you go in because that was most prevalent. And then the next thing down was asbestos because there's contaminated rooms. So you can't even touch some of the other things until you've dealt with the asbestos. So you kind of then have to go at it twofold with an asbestos contractor merging the asbestos works along with the hazardous material works. So they do highlight a lot of different things and it's a lot of good information. Probably brings about quite a few headaches for the developers.
Yeah.
But better having those headaches and heading it off at the pass before.
Yeah, it's kind of a nature of property development, isn't it? You know, if you're taking on these redundant hold, you know, former workplaces, it's kind of you've got to have that knowledge that you're definitely probably going to come across some of these hazards.
Definitely, and that's the thing. It's I think some people perhaps think, oh, I'll just buy it and I'll just flip it. I'll be all right.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, well, there's some really, really nasty stuff that we've found over the years left in buildings that you just wouldn't want to be near, and you really do need to take it into consideration. See, I think that's it on hazardous material surveys.
Yeah.
Like we're saying, it's asbestos, but it's also a whole load of other stuff. If you ever need any help on a hazardous material survey or you wanted to have a chat about it to kind of see where we stand and what we would think on what we would need to do, because like we're saying, there's different amounts of testing and sampling that can be done, well, just reach out to us at Acorn. We'll gladly help.
Yeah, I hope you found that useful.
Remember, asbestos first, not last.